this is a massive celebration today. We are officially recording our 300th episode. This podcast is the biggest revenue generator for us inside our business. People listen to this podcast, they work with us again and again and again. And so I really want to celebrate that because it's no easy thing to show up and record 300 episodes. And then for me personally, the most transformative, impactful, meaningful episodes that I've ever shared on this podcast was the 3-part series that I did. Oh, I'm going to get all choked up about this. So let's talk about what's coming for the next 300 episodes. Hello, welcome back to another episode of the Scalable Freedom Show. Fam, this is a massive celebration today. We are officially recording our 300th episode. I'm so excited to be recording this episode here in the studio that we're at now. We're at the Leaders Lounge in Perth, and it's such an exciting episode. I was working out exactly what I was going to share today, and there were so many ways that I could have taken this. But what I really wanted to do was basically bring you on the journey of where we started this podcast, the massive trajectory of the last 6 years, and what 300 episodes represents. Something that I say to clients a lot is, I think we're really, really good at celebrating our outcome wins. 50K months or, multi-6-figure years or insert other accolade here. But very rarely do we actually celebrate the progress wins. And the irony is that the progress wins are the things that create the massive wins. So I know that the majority of the clients that I have right now, the majority of students that I have, the majority of money that I make is because of this podcast in some way. In fact, this podcast is the biggest revenue generator for us inside our business. People listen to this podcast, they work with us again and again and again. And so I really want to celebrate that because it's no easy thing to show up and record 300 episodes. And in fact, as I take you on this journey with me of what the last 6 years have been, you will hear that there's so many seasons where showing up has looked like it being really easeful, yes. And also there's been times where showing up has been really, really hard. Like practically it's meant showing up at 8 o'clock at night after I've injected myself 7 times that day because we're in an IVF round, or, showing up and recording episodes on a Monday morning where I'm exhausted and I have nothing to say because I've been up with a baby all night, or, other things that you would be able to relate to, like grief, challenge, like all of it. And so to be able to remain consistent in this is something that I'm really proud of. And I hope that it inspires you to celebrate the things that you've been really consistent in inside your business as well. So we're going to start by looking at where we were when this podcast first kicked off. So let's just cycle back in time for a moment to August 2020, which was when the first episode was released. And at the time, the podcast was called Shine Online with Ellie Swift. If you're an OG, I'm going to celebrate you and thank you for being here later in this episode. But if you're an OG, you will remember the brand was Shine Online with Ellie Swift. And it was all about online business and shining bright and all of those things. And it was very reflective of the brand at the time, not so much now. It's evolved. But those first episodes were around the same time that we started building out masterminds inside the business. So we were a year into running our first masterminds. And in fact, when I went back and had a look, that first month that we were doing the podcast, I was sharing about just having a 250K launch from 4 emails. So we sent 4 emails and we completely sold out both of our masterminds. So there were some really big wins as we were celebrating the podcast. I was 4 years into the business at that point. We were on a massive growth trajectory. And the entire reason for starting the podcast was that I didn't have anywhere long form to be able to connect. I knew that as I was starting to have conversations with people that were coming into my world, there was no real way for them to get a sense of why and how I was the person for them, why I was the coach for them. And what I kept seeing again and again was that there was almost this incongruence where someone would come to me and they'd be on a sales call or whatever else, and they didn't really fully know how I could help them because I didn't have a space where I was sharing my experience, my background, my expertise to be able to talk in depth about the business strategies that I was using to support clients every single day. And once I brought that in and really introduced that in the podcast, that was when my thought leadership started expanding. I started being invited more onto other podcasts as guests. I started being invited into bigger, more expansive rooms because people really started to see my expertise. Because it is one thing to use AI to share your process, which obviously we didn't do 6 years ago. It's a whole other thing to be able to sit on a podcast, whether it's audio or video, and to be able to riff about who you are, what you do, your experience, the ways in which you support your clients or your students or your members or whatever. Like, you are very quickly going to be able to see somebody who knows their shit versus someone that doesn't. And that is why long form is so powerful and why we're actually seeing a resurgence back to long form again. So it's really cool sitting here talking about this, because I actually think we're in an era where, podcasting was still reasonably new 6 years ago. It was easy. We launched at #1 when we released this podcast, and it felt kind of easeful to do that. Now, if you were to launch a podcast, it would be a little bit trickier to generate that same type of outcome because, of course, the market is bigger, it's more saturated. And also, if a client says to me in this market, would you recommend I start a podcast? I still say absolutely yes, make it video podcasting in 2026. And having that way of being able to share something long form is going to support you 100 times over. So what we're going to do in this episode is I'm just going to take you through some of the milestones that have occurred that the podcast has seen me through over the last 6 years, because what it has become has been a way of documenting the business and life through so many different seasons. I've shared everything from in-depth strategies. I've had people that have reached out to me, told me, I have messages weekly in my DMs of people saying things like, I listened to that advice and I made an extra 5K, or I did this one sales tweak that you recommended and it generated more of this. Listening to this podcast has, as a free resource, supported so many business owners, and I really want to acknowledge and celebrate that, and also talk about the seasons of life that have occurred during this time and really what we've navigated together, especially for those of you that are OG listeners and have been here since the start. And if that's you, please come over and send me a DM, because I'd really personally like to thank you, because listening to 6 years of a podcast is an absolute investment in your time. And it means the world to me that maybe you have spent 6 years of your life listening to this podcast. So if that is you, please come into my DMs so I can celebrate you and thank you personally. It would really mean the world to me. Okay, so what I'm actually going to do next is I'm going to read you out. If you're watching the video version of this, you're going to see I've got my phone here. I'm going to read you out a bunch of the milestones that have occurred in this process of becoming the person that I am now 6 years later. And then we're going to take a moment to talk a little bit about who I have become behind that, the beliefs, the shifts, the changes, the person that I've needed to be as this has been built out. So you heard me say before that when we first started this podcast, we were doing some cool shit. We did a launch at the time of starting that first episode, which was a 250K launch. It was around that time that I think we did our first 100K month, that I think the first month over 100K was something like 140K. So we did that first 100K month. We then went on to do a 7-figure year 2 years later. So that came 2 years after that. We created and trademarked the Scalable Freedom term as a concept. That officially went through last year, but the process of that was 2 years in the works prior to that. And then we named this podcast the Scalable Freedom Show. So we changed the name. I went from a season of growth to a season of stability. So I went from starting this podcast, living in my tiny townhouse, through to buying my dream home, and then going through IVF, pregnancy, birthing Sunny, going from that growth season to a stabilisation period when I had her for the last couple of years, getting married, running my business now as a mother. So I would say it's probably been the most significant 6 years of my life. If I were to look at every season of life and then the season that this podcast has, documented, it's okay, that is definitely the most significant. There's definitely been the most change and growth there. And so where are we now based on that? Again, I'm going to talk to this and then I'll speak a little bit about who I needed to be to make this happen. Next month, it will have been 10 years in running this business. So we are coming up to 10 years as a coach, as an online business owner, was in marketing 10 years prior to that, but we will have done 10 years in this business next month. And again, we've really stabilized now. So we had a big season of growth. We're in this stabilization period. We'll absolutely go through seasons of growth again. But something that I've had to do over these last couple of years is I have to be comfortable and okay with running this business alongside motherhood. And if I want to be this person at home, there's a certain type of business owner that I want to be right now. And that's going to mean that there will be trade-offs in the type of growth that I want to create. And I'm okay with that because my ultimate goal is not just to be CEO of this business. My ultimate goal is to be CEO of this business and more so have this amazing life. Like that is the entire point of Scalable Freedom, right? So that's where we're at right now. And honestly, I feel kind of deep in the arrival fallacy, which I've alluded to in a few other podcast episodes. So let's just talk for a moment about who I've needed to be along the way. So if we think about the point of this podcast has been to bring you behind the scenes into the type of business that this is so that you can see for yourself what running an online business gets to look like. And then as we've developed, it's turned into what it gets to look like if you're running a mastermind or a group program business online. Now, for me, throughout this process, there's been so many different iterations of who I've needed to become. Like if we think about the start of this journey, consistency, it was kind of easy, to be honest. Being the person who records a podcast like this week to week, it was simple. Like life was simpler for me pre-kids. It was simpler to grow a business. It was easier to just prioritize time to generate an outcome. That is not the reality anymore. In fact, there was a period there where consistency was quite challenging, and being able to show up for a podcast like this week to week and show up for a business week to week was somewhat challenging. But what I know is that when you've got markers like a podcast, like clients and programs and delivery and things that you are running consistently as the thing that you have to show up for, it forces you to level up every single step of the way. So for me, I've had to keep being the person who can run the business that I've created. In some ways, like that momentum was built in the time we were starting the podcast. It was like the momentum of the business was built, the momentum of the mastermind was built, the momentum of marketing was built. And then as I grew and shifted, I wasn't going, well, who am I now and what do I want to create? It was like, I've created this business. It's running like a steam train and I have to shift who I am if I want to continue to maintain it and optimize it. And that's been a big part of the becoming. If I were to recommend anything in this, I would say ultimately that's what you want as a business owner. Like you want to build something that's bigger than you, and then you continue to shift and grow and evolve so that you can maintain that thing. What I see so many people do is go, all right, well, life shifting, I'm going to close the chapter on that business and then I'm going to rebuild something to suit this particular season. But what you do is you lose momentum, you cut things off that don't need to be cut off, and then you have to actually work twice as hard to build something new. What I've managed to do, and it's again, same with this podcast, is go, well, how can I just iterate each step of the way so that instead of building something new, we're just shape shifting so that it fits my life. So when I think about what it looks like fitting my life now, it is different. So when we first started the podcast, I remember I used to often sit with a glass of wine in the evening and record the pod. I would do sometimes on a Monday morning, I would sit with a coffee. It was always very spacious. I always had a lot of time. I would always make sure that showing up for the podcast meant that I would always do it when I was really optimal, because recording podcasts, it is one of those things that you really want to be kind of optimal. I just do not have that ability in my life now. And those of you that are listening to this and have mothers of small kids or other big priorities in your life, you will know exactly what I mean. All the things that we used to have to kind of make the right conditions for in life pre-kids to afterwards, whole different ball game. So now it's I have a block of 2 hours, great, I'm recording the podcast. It doesn't matter what time of day it is, it's happening. So that's my reality these days. It's happening far more methodically. I'm able to use the data that I have inside the business to record these episodes so much more effectively. I'm able to look at what problems I can help solve. So it works like a well-oiled machine in so many ways. So it actually ends up being something that saves me time So I think for me, running the podcast in that particular season was very different. I had so much more time. Now I have so much less of it, but actually I'm far more intentional about how I'm spending the time. And I know that, there were stories I told myself about how a podcast was something that just took up so much of my life. That wasn't actually true. In fact, I now run the podcast in, for me, like weekly, 30 minutes or less a week, I'm showing up for this podcast. And yet, again, it continues to be the biggest revenue generator for our business. And so that to me is success, that I get to do it in less time, but it's still something that is so, so effective for us inside the business. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about best performing episodes. So I'm going to share these in two parts. I'm going to talk a little bit about the best performing episodes, very generally speaking, in business. And then I want to talk a little bit about the best performing episodes that have been more personal. And it'll make sense as to why I want to speak to those in a moment. What I have found to be true is that there have been so many podcast episodes where I've received little messages from you. So I'm going to give you an example. I shared an episode that released just yesterday, straight away, DM from someone who was like, the way that you talked about messaging in that episode gave me so many ahas about why I'm not attracting the right ideal client. This podcast has always been so meaningful for me, not because of like these couple of big episodes that have stood out and created really transformational change, but rather because of every single week what I release getting DMs where it's shifted like one belief or it's supported someone with one strategy that's gone on to make a really profound difference in their life. Like those tiny little tidbits that I hear from so many of you each week has been the thing that has kept me going. And I think this is so reflective of business because the wins, the growth, the massive ahas, they don't happen in the big milestones. Growth doesn't happen because of like the one PR piece that was released or one masterclass that you did that changed the entire trajectory of your business. It happens in the day-to-day, the week-to-week, the consistent ways that you're sharing, showing up, whatever it is. And when I think about this podcast and probably the reason why I've been able to be so consistent, as in I've literally shown up weekly, bar a couple of weeks for 6 years straight, is that I've received those consistent small messages from all of you. So obviously, if you've ever sent me a message about this podcast, thank you. And also, I think it's just that useful reminder that sometimes we're looking for what is that one episode I can share that's going to change everything, that's going to blow the podcast up. But instead, if you're looking at a long form platform that you want to have for a really long time, I'd encourage you instead to think about what's the value that I can give every single week and the small, tiny piece that is potentially going to make a massive shift for somebody in their life, because that's certainly been true for me when I think about all the business content that I've shared. Now, in terms of best ever episodes, there's a couple of really significant ones that I still get messages about to this day. In fact, one of the most popular ever episodes was one of the very first episodes we did, like top 5. And I still get people, I would say monthly, reach out and say that they listened to this episode, which is the episode I did with my husband, Chay, which is just wild to me. I really need to get him on the podcast again. Our schedules are not friendly for this, especially with Sunny now, but I really need to get him back on the pod. I have people who reference that episode, or maybe we did it over a couple of episodes all the time. I know we did a couple of hours where we talked about our marriage and our partnership and the way that we work together. And obviously so much of that information will have shifted and changed, but the crux of our relationship, I don't even know if we were married at the time, the crux of our, we weren't, it was 6 years ago, we were definitely not married, has remained the same. The way that we work in partnerships remain the same. And the reason why I think that episode still remains one of our best performing, if not the best performing, is because it's sharing more about the person behind the business. The reason I think that's useful, or the lesson in that, the reminder for you and for me, is that people always want to see behind the curtain. People want to see the BTS of who you are, how you serve, what you do. If you're a coach, a mentor, a consultant, people are always going to want to see that. So it's worth checking in with yourself. Like, have I shared any of that behind the scenes lately? what does it look like for me to do more of that? I know it's something that I'm constantly asking myself as well, because it is something that's such a game changer when you go there. And then for me personally, the most transformative, impactful, meaningful episodes that I've ever shared on this podcast was the 3-part series that I did. Oh, I'm going to get all choked up about this. Was the 3-part episode that I shared when we went through our IVF journey. And the reason why that was so transformative is because I had maybe over 100 people reach out and tell me that that series supported them in some way. We never want to have to go through hard life things. Like, that's just not something we ever want to do. But to know that, you know, if you create a platform like a podcast and then you go through something hard and that you have a vehicle to share your challenges with somebody else to be able to make their experience a little less painful, like that is just everything, as I know so many of you will know from your own experiences of doing that. And so having so many people tell me that those episodes changed their life, it made them feel less alone when they experienced miscarriage or when they were going through a period of extended conception. Like, that to me has just been everything. And I never ever thought when I started a business podcast 6 years ago that I would go on to create a 3-part series on extended conception and loss and huge challenges within that time period. But the fact that I did and that I had a way of being able to share it was just so massive. The fact that I know it supported some people. In fact, I have so many clients now who literally came to me because they connected with me through that shared experience of going through IVF and loss. Again, none of us ever want to have to go through that. But the fact that this podcast became the vehicle for me to be able to share that was amazing. And I'm so grateful that I had the opportunity to do that. I remember curating like word for word those episodes. I remember discussing it with a girlfriend at the time and saying to her, you know, I don't want to hold back anything in these episodes because the process is so raw and so challenging, and people share from the end result, which is the baby's here, it's joyful, and you don't get like the heart of how hard it is if you're just sharing from that experience. And while I did absolutely share once, you know, I was over 12 weeks pregnant with Sunny, I really went there on just how horrendous that period was for us and our challenges around that. So if you're listening to this and that is a season maybe you're in or someone you know is in, then we'll drop those links to those episodes in the show notes. Please go and listen to them or pass them on to somebody who you know might need to hear them, because if it supports one other person, then that is a massive win for me. Okay, so let's talk about what's coming for the next 300 episodes, or like where to from here. And then I'm going to share a little bit about just some specific thank you messages as well for the last 6 years to date. So when I think about this podcast, and actually I was talking about this with Chay earlier today, and he was saying to me, you know, do you see yourself doing another 300 episodes? And I was like, yeah, of course. At this podcast, why would it go anywhere? It now is just like my ride or die for life and business. Like, as long as I'm doing this work, which I see myself doing until I'm about 97, the podcast will just be part of that process. And when I think about what the next 300 episodes look like, it looks like more documentation of the challenges that I'm experiencing alongside my clients day in, day out, what I'm seeing from them, and the best ways that I can support them to feel inspired and seen and heard and be able to create the results that they want related to scaling their business and life for freedom. The purpose of this podcast has always been to support women. And as I got more and more clear on my mission over time, it's become the place for women to be able to scale for what freedom looks like for them. So that is what we will continue to do here, fam, over the next 300 plus episodes. I'll always, my promise to you is that I'll always be looking at ways to inspire you, to educate, to share more, to give you like the absolute best and greatest of what's happening online at any one time. And I can't wait to sit here in another 300 episodes time to talk about what the next 6 years looks like. It's going to be really good. Before I close out this episode, this podcast would not be possible without a few key people. So first of all, I want to thank my team massively. Niv, Tammy, our extended podcast team. So right now we are at the Leaders Lounge. We also worked with Bambi Media for years prior. Thank you so much for helping us bring this podcast to life. We could not do it without you. To my incredible clients who, even those of you who are clients right now in my world, you are still the ones who listen to this repeatedly every week. I'm so incredibly grateful for you. You have no idea the role that you play in my life, and how grateful I am for you every single day. To my incredible husband, who I don't know if he'll listen to this episode or not, but the entire reason that I can do so much in my life and in my work is because of him. And to my beautiful little girl, Sunny, who's like my reason for getting out of bed every morning and just makes me feel all the more bright and sparkly and alive just by being her. And to all of you here who have been with us on this journey, whether it was from the start, whether this is the very first episode that you're listening to, it means so much to me. The reason that we can continue to do this podcast and make it what it is because we continue to see incredible listenership week in, week out. And that means so much to me that you are here. Again, my commitment to you is that I'm going to keep bringing you the absolute best. And I'm so grateful that you take the time to spend with me each week. It means more to me than you know. So thank you again for being here. Here's to celebrating all of our wins that are progress wins, not just the outcomes, looking at all the ways in our life that we're maintaining consistency and showing up for ourselves in our business, because it really is the thing that leads to the big results. I'm so grateful you're here. Thank you again. And as a last request to you, if you could be so kind, it would mean so much to me if you could go ahead and hit subscribe wherever you're listening to this podcast. Like I mentioned, you know that my commitment to you, 6 years, we've showed up, we've committed to what this podcast is today. It is going to continue for the next 6 years plus. If you would be so kind as to go ahead and subscribe, it will mean that we can get it in the ears of more people just like you, so that we continue to create more freedom for amazing women scaling their businesses. Thank you again for being here. Have the most amazing week ahead.